So how guys, how are you? It is the Suzanne Akhtar winner of a child protection program in the Punjab area of Pakistan, and today we will discuss about the autonomic nervous system, corneal nerves, trigeminal system, and auditory system, vestibular system, visual system, and other major organs and systems of the brain. So let's discuss about what the autonomic nervous system really is and its functions and working. Types of the nervous system. So the nervous system has two types: central nervous system that is composed of brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is divided into sympathetic nervous system for the voluntary control of the muscle, and the autonomic nervous system involuntary function like heart rate and flight or flight response. Parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest system, etc. Peripheral nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is composed of the two parts: fight or flight system and parasympathetic rest and digest system. That is the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. So let's discuss more about the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system. Voluntary control or how it works to neuron chain. A single travels from the central nervous system through a preganglion neuron to the ganglion, then to the postganglion neuron that reaches the target organ. Neurotransmitter key chemicals include acetylcholine and noradrenaline. Opposing actions. Sympathetic and parasympathetic system usually have opposite effects. One speed heart, the other slow it to maintain homeostatic condition. So the opposing action is sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system both have the opposing action. For example, one speed the heart and the other slow it down to maintain homeostatic condition. Examples of the autonomic nervous system are heart, lung, digestion, urination, and sexual procedure and sweating. Autonomic nervous system. So let's discuss more about the autonomic nervous system related what it is really. So let's have a diagram view of it. So autonomic nervous system. The corneal nerve 3 controls the eye. The corneal nerve 7 controls the glands in the present in the mouth. Corneal nerve 9 controls the glands. Corneal nerve 10 control heart. Corneal nerves 10 control heart. Trachea, bronchia, esophagus, stomach, abdominal, blood vessel, liver, pancreas, adrenal glands, small intestine, large intestine, kidney, bladder, glands, and external genitalia. So it is a region of the spinal cord from which the corneal nerves and the nerve emerges and forms a complete autonomic nervous system of the body. Autonomic nervous system, formerly the vegetative nervous system, is a division of the nervous system that operates internal organ, smooth muscle, and grand. The automatic nervous system is a control system that acts largely unconsciously and regulates bodily functions such as heart rate, contraction, digestion, respiratory rate, pulmonary response, urination, and sexual arousal. Flight or flight response, also known as Acute stress response is set into action by the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system activates fight or flight response, increase heart rate, and the parasympathetic nervous system promotes rest and digest. Example: slow heart rate, aids digestion, etc. Autonomic nervous system. So, autonomic nervous system is regulated by integrated reflexes through the brain stem to the spinal cord and organ. These functions include control of respiration, cardiac regulation, vascular activity, and certain reflex actions such as coughing, sneezing, swelling, and vomiting, and themselves divided into areas and are linked to the autonomic subsystem and peripheral nervous system. The hypothalamus, just above the brain stem, acts as an integrator for the autonomic function, receiving autonomic regulatory input from the limbic system. So it is divided into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system and enteric nervous system sensory organs. So let's study the sympathetic nervous system consists of cells in the with bodies in lateral gray column from T1 to L1, L2 section, L3 section of the spinal cord. These cell bodies generally called general visceral inferent neuron or paraganglionic neuron. There are several locations upon which paraganglionic neuron can synapse for their postganglionic neuron. Parasympathetic nervous system consists of cells in bodies in one or two locations. The brainstem, cranial nerves are the following, and the sacral spinal cord known as following. These are paraganglionic neuron with synapse with postganglionic neuron in these locations. Enteric nervous system. Let's discuss what the enteric nervous system really is. Nervous system is a vast system of neurons in the gastrointestinal tract, often called second brain or brain in the gut, that control digestion autonomously. The complex system manages swelling, enzyme release, nutrient absorption, blood flow, emulation, operating independently, but also communicate with central nervous system through the vagus nerve, linking gut function to mood and stress. Functions include the following. Roles include the following. Let's have an overview of what the enteric nervous system really is. ENTERNS, enteric nervous system, enteric nervous system, enteric nervous system, enteric nervous system, enteric nervous system.
Can't trust your AI results? Let Borium sift through 170 million papers and find verified answers.
This is DITW Anatomy and Physiology, and you are watching the video on the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is an intrinsic nervous system of the gastrointestinal system. What this means is that there is a nervous system which acts autonomously inside the stomach and intestines. There are reflex circuits which exist within the enteric nervous system that needs no instruction from the brain in order to work. These reflex circuits are split into two layers, called the submucosal plexus and the myenteric plexus. These reflex circuits can detect the state of the gastrointestinal tract and adjust as necessary. For example, when you eat food, food, your small intestines are the primary source for nutrient absorption. As the small intestine comes into contact with the nutrients, the intestines increase contractile activity to move nutrients across the small intestines. The permeability of the intestinal wall decreases in order to allow greater nutrient exchange, and the blood flow is increased to small intestines to assist with nutrient exchange. This is all done without consulting the brain, which is a pretty unique capability. The fact that the gastrointestinal system has this unique autonomous capability is the reason why people think of the GI tract or gut as a second brain, since there are roughly 500 million neurons embedded in the gut, which is more neurons than found in the brain of many small animals. However, just because there are many neurons located in the gut, it does not necessarily mean that it truly acts like a brain or is completely autonomous. The central nervous system, specifically the nerves of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, still plays an important role in the regulation of the gastrointestinal tract. Please see my videos on the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system for more on how they influence changes in digestion. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want more information...
Hello and welcome back to GI 101. My name is Dr. Adriana Lazarescu and I'm your host for this episode. With me in the studio today is Dr. Dan Sadowski. Dan, what are we discussing today?
Well, Adriana, over the next couple of episodes, I would like to discuss some of the therapeutic options that are available for patients with GI motility disorders, namely the prokinetic drugs. In particular, I would like to help our listeners understand the mechanism of action of these medications.
Sounds great. We have wanted to do this for some time. But first, if we are going to talk about drug mechanisms, we should discuss the enteric nervous system, since that is where prokinetic drugs mainly exert their effect.
Absolutely. And I have to say that most students find the enteric nervous system very confusing, but I hope to be able to simplify a very complex process.
Okay, so gut motility and the enteric nervous system. How does it work?
So, the most basic aspect of gastrointestinal motility is the peristaltic reflex. Let me describe how it works. Have a look at the generic piece of gut shown on this slide. Now, think about what has to happen in order for the food bolus that you see in the lumen to move distally in this piece of gut. First, you need a contraction in the gut smooth muscle proximally or upstream from the food bolus to move it distally. And it would be also helpful if there was a relaxation of the smooth muscles downstream from the bolus to permit easier passage of the food. In fact, this is exactly what happens all the time in the gut. This upstream contraction ahead of a food bolus and downstream relaxation of smooth muscle is the most fundamental aspect of gut motility, and it's called the peristaltic reflex.
How does the enteric nervous system generate the peristaltic reflex?
Okay, so it turns out that distension of the gut wall by the food bolus is the primary initiator of a neural reflex arc, and this arc propagates peristalsis. This distension stimulates sensory nerve fibers in the gut wall, which then fire onto intermediary neurons. The intermediary neurons behind the food bolus synapse with cholinergic nerves, that is, nerves that release acetylcholine, or ACH. And as you know, ACH is the most powerful stimulator of smooth muscle contractions. Conversely, the interneurons ahead of the food bolus synapse with inhibitory neurons that can release a variety of neurotransmitters, such as VIP, nitric oxide, and ATP. These neurotransmitters are potent relaxers of smooth muscle. And so, in a nutshell, that is the peristaltic reflex. Distension of the gut lumen by a food bolus causes proximal muscle contraction, mediated by ACH, and downstream relaxation of smooth muscle, mediated by inhibitory neurotransmitters like VIP, nitric oxide, and ATP. I should also mention that this reflex is considered to be local because it can occur in the gut autonomously.
So we have a number of medications that have either cholinergic or anticholinergic activity. How do these affect the peristaltic reflex and gut motility?
That's an excellent question. And we do have a number of medications that we consider to be cholinergic, such as bethanechol, physostigmine, and neostigmine. And as you might expect, these drugs enhance the contraction arm of the peristaltic reflex, and thus the common side effects of these drugs are cramps and diarrhea. Conversely, there are also many drugs that have anticholinergic activity, such as the antidepressants. These drugs commonly cause constipation as an adverse effect.
Okay. So Dan, perhaps you should talk a bit about how the peristaltic reflex is regulated, as this will be relevant to our discussion of prokinetic drugs.
Right. So, as you can imagine, it's important for the body to be able to up or down regulate the peristaltic reflex depending on various factors. For example, in situations of high nutrient load, the gut will need to suppress the peristaltic reflex in order to allow more time for absorption. So how does this happen? Well, it turns out that there are a number of mechanisms that the body has to either enhance or dampen the amplitude of this peristaltic reflex. And I would like to touch on three of the most important: serotonin, dopamine, and the endogenous opioids.
Let's talk about the serotonin system.
So serotonin is probably one of the most important regulators of gut motility, and it's released from the gut in response to various stimuli, and it has two important receptors, the 5-HT4 receptor and the 5-HT3 receptor. First, let's talk about the 5-HT4 receptor. When serotonin binds to this receptor, it greatly enhances ACH release from the cholinergic nerves, thereby increasing smooth muscle contraction and forward gut motility. Conversely, when serotonin binds to the 5-HT3 receptor, it works more on the relaxation side of the reflex arc. Incidentally, the 5-HT3 receptor is also involved in gut secretion, as well as pain transmission from the gut. And we will come back to these aspects when we talk about the 5-HT3 receptor antagonist drugs in our next episode.
Let's talk about the dopamine system.
So, dopamine is released by sympathetic nerves, and its main receptor in the gut is the D2 dopamine receptor. Think of dopamine as a brake on the entire peristaltic reflex. When dopamine is released in response to sympathetic stimulation, it reduces ACH secretion by cholinergic nerves, as well as it leads to reduced activity in the VIP, nitric oxide, and ATP-containing nerves.
Last but not least, what about the endogenous opioid system?
Right, so endogenous opioids are released by the gut in response to a number of stimuli, and there are three main opioid receptors: delta, kappa, and mu. Delta and kappa receptors are found mostly in the CNS and mediate visceral pain sensation. Mu receptors, however, are found in the gut, among other places. Think of endogenous opioids as another braking system that the body has to suppress the peristaltic reflex. When endogenous opioids bind to the gut mu receptor, ACH secretion is greatly reduced.
So Dan, it sounds like the enteric nervous system is also very important for digestive function.
Absolutely. And I also want to point out that the enteric nervous system is not only responsible for gut motility, but it has a number of other important roles as well, such as modulating fluid secretion, for example, gastric acid production, regulating blood flow, and influencing nutrient absorption.
Thanks, Dan. That's it.
The autonomic nervous system is composed of three subdivisions: sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic, and enteric nervous system. In this video, essentially, we will talk about the enteric nervous system and a few words about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. It is very important to note that the gastrointestinal system has its own nervous system, which is called the enteric nervous system. Many neurophysiologists call it the second brain because the enteric nervous system can and does function autonomously, but it also communicates with the central nervous system through the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, meaning that it is also influenced by the central nervous system. The principal components of the enteric nervous system are two networks or plexuses of neurons, both of which are embedded in the wall of the digestive tract and extend from esophagus to anus. The first network is myenteric plexus, which is also called Auerbach's plexus, and the second one is submucosal plexus, which is also called Meissner's plexus. Talking about the localization of these plexuses, first let me draw here the section of the small intestine somewhere between the duodenum and ileum, and we will see where exactly these plexuses are located in a wall of gastrointestinal tract. As you already know, like the rest of the gastrointestinal tract, the small intestine is made up of 4 layers of tissue. The mucosa forms the inner layer of epithelial tissue and is specialized for the absorption of nutrients from chyme. Deep to the mucosa is the submucosal layer that provides blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves to support the mucosa on the surface. The 2 layers of the smooth muscle, an inner circular layer, and a longitudinal outer muscular layer make the muscularis externa. Finally, the serosa forms the outermost layer of epithelial tissue. As I already said, the principal components of the enteric nervous system are 2 networks or plexuses of neurons. The first one, the myenteric plexus, is located between the longitudinal and circular layers of muscle in the muscularis externa here, and as I already said, it is a network of the neurons looking like this. The second plexus, which is called submucosal plexus, as its name implies, buried in a submucosa over here and looks like this. In general, the enteric nervous system consists of some 100 million neurons. About the functions of these plexuses, I would say that myenteric plexus increases the tone of the gut as well as the velocity and intensity of contractions. This plexus is concerned with motility throughout the whole gut. In short, I would say that it controls digestive tract motility. As for the submucosal plexus, it is more involved with the local conditions and controls local secretion and blood flow to the submucosa, which of course determines absorption. Also, it controls local muscle movements. Now, let's in detail talk how the enteric nervous system works given an example when a person eats something. First, I will explain how the enteric nervous system controls peristalsis. It is extremely important to note that enteric nervous system works into two different ways. First, it functions autonomously using the local reflex, and second, it also functions in communication with sympathetic as well as parasympathetic nervous system. First, I will explain how it functions autonomously. Again, let me first here zoom a section of a small intestine somewhere between duodenum and ileum. Here we have mucosa, circular muscle layer. Here there is a longitudinal muscle, and of course serosa. Over here we have the myenteric plexus, which consists mainly of three types of neurons. The red ones represent ascending network of neurons, and blue ones represent descending network of neurons. We also have two types of sensory neurons here. The first one, which I'm drawing here, receives stimulus from the smooth muscle. And also we have another type of sensory neuron, which is located in the submucosa. They would be stimulated by chemical composition of the food. Both sensory neurons give branches to the ascending as well as descending network of neurons and stimulate them. And of course, don't forget that here in the submucosa we have the submucosal plexuses. Plexus. The same is also true for parasympathetic nervous system, but they work opposite to each other. The sympathetic nervous system stimulates the body's fight or flight response. It would be activated in a case of threat, stress, and fear. In all above-mentioned situations, you do not need to increase gastrointestinal activity because you have to save yourself first. Therefore, the sympathetic nervous system inhibits both plexuses, decreasing peristalsis, blood flow, absorption, local secretion in the mucosa. As for parasympathetic nervous system, as you already know, it is responsible for the rest and digest. When you eat some meal, parasympathetic nervous system will be activated and dominates over the sympathetic nervous system and stimulates both plexuses, causing increasing peristalsis, blood flow, absorption, and local secretion in mucosa.
So it was the enteric nervous system. Let's discuss the effect of the caffeine on the autonomic nervous system. Is an ingredient consumed beverages such as coffee, tea, and soda. Short-term physiological effects of caffeine include increased blood pressure and sympathetic nerve outflow. Habitual consumption symptom of caffeine may inhibit physiological short-term effect. Consumption of caffeine espresso increases parasympathetic activity in habitual caffeine consumer. However, decaffeinated espresso inhibits parasympathetic activity in habitual caffeine consumer. It is possible that other bioactive ingredient in decaffeinated espresso may also contribute to the inhibition of parasympathetic activity in habitual caffeine consumer. Caffeine is capable of increasing work capacity while engaging in performing strenuous tasks. In one study, caffeine proved a greater maximum heart rate while a strenuous task was being performed compared to a placebo. This tendency is due likely due to the caffeine ability to increase sympathetic nerve outflow. Further, this study found recovery intense exercise was slower when caffeine was consumed prior to exercise. Study found that recovery after intense exercise was slower when caffeine was consumed prior to exercise. This finding is indicative of caffeine tendency to inhibit parasympathetic activity in non-habitual consumers. The caffeine simulated increase in nerve activity is likely to evoke other physiological effects such as body attempt to maintain homeostasis. The effect of caffeine on parasympathetic activity may be depending on the position of the individual, while autonomic responses are measured. One study found that seated position inhibited autonomic activity after caffeine consumption. However, parasympathetic activity increased in the supine position. This finding may explain why some habitual caffeine consumers 75 mg or Less do not experience short-term effect of caffeine if their routine requires many hours in a seated position. It is important to note that the data supporting increased parasympathetic activity in the supine position was derived from experiment involving participants between the ages 25 to 30 and who were considered healthy and sedentary. Caffeine may also influence autonomic activity differently for individuals who are more active or elderly. That's all for the autonomic nervous system. That we will study in the next lessons or chapters and sessions. Donate as much as you can for the Veena Akhtar Rifat Child Protection Program in Punjab area of Pakistan. That's all for the today.